I absolutely love the outdoors and have always been really into camping, hiking, whitewater rafting, fishing, and all that kind of stuff. My passion for the outdoors began when I was a young child growing up in Illinois. Admittedly, I have always been fascinated by the mysteries of the natural world, and I have spent countless hours researching and studying various paranormal phenomena. I had always secretly hoped I would be able to encounter something paranormal, since I thought there was this romantic allure to experiencing something so life-changing. I definitely got my wish. However, I must say that I'm just grateful that I was able to escape with my life. One summer, while visiting a friend in the Appalachian Mountains, I had an encounter that I will never forget. I had just finished college and was taking a road trip through the Appalachian Mountains to my buddy's cabin. But one day, we decided to go on a day hike through the woods. As we were walking, we heard a strange noise coming from the trees above us. As we got closer, the noise became increasingly horrifying, growing louder and more distinct. It sounded like a low, demonic growl, and it seemed to be coming from all over the place, almost like it was coming from multiple sources at once. Then I saw something big moving around in the trees. I asked my friend what it was, and he said he had no idea. It was hard to make out what was causing the movement, but it was definitely something large and powerful, and it made loud thumps as it moved. We figured it might be a bear or something, but we still had no idea what made that growl. We eventually got to a creek, and there, standing at the edge, was this thing crouched over, drinking some water. Its back was turned to us, so we both took cover behind some trees to get a closer look without it knowing we were there. It got up, turned around, and that's when we saw it was a huge, beastly figure with long, thin limbs and a pale white complexion. Its eyes were a bright, piercing blue, and its face was twisted and ugly. The thing seriously must have been at least 9 feet tall, and we were both in shock at the sight of it. We should have just run away right then, but we were just in awe of this thing. It had antlers like a deer and looked like something out of Warcraft. Then all of a sudden it just stopped dead still and then swung its head around to look right at us. It knew we were there. Immediately, my friend and I took off through the woods back where we came from, trying not to scream the whole way. It roared at us, which was painful to listen to. The roar came from all around, and I was sure that thing was going to kill us. My friend claims that I ran first, but I know he did. If he didn't run first, he at least screamed first. I'm usually very good in emergency situations, but I admit it, I was terrified. We made it safely back to my friend's house, and based on the physical description of a creature we found online, we determined that what we came so close to was a wendigo. We discovered that a wendigo is a creature from Native American folklore that was said to be a malevolent spirit that possessed humans and turned them into cannibalistic monsters. The more we learned about the wendigo, the more we realized how horrifying it truly is. We found this Native American shaman online who claimed to have knowledge of the wendigo and had the capabilities to harness the power of the spirit world to free this possessed spirit and end this wendigo's insatiable hunger for human flesh. We were both broke, but after seeing the creature in person, we couldn't live with ourselves if we knew we could free the poor person from spending their afterlife as such a horrific beast. We both pooled our money together and drove to the shaman's remote cabin and spent several days meditating, chanting, drinking plant medicines, and preparing for the ritual. The night of the ritual was one of my life's most intense and terrifying experiences. We took peyote and the shaman chanted and performed all kinds of crazy rituals while my friend and I battled with our own inner demons. At one point, the room was filled with a thick mist, and we could feel the evil presence of the wendigo all around us. Finally, after endless hours of chanting, ritualistic dancing, and deep energetic work, the shaman announced that the spirit had been purged and released from its curse. He told us that the spirit world would bless us for our selfless acts, and the free spirit and his ancestors would now be our guardian angels. He told us that everything we do in life has consequences whether we could see them or not. That always stuck with me. The experience left me with a newfound respect for the power of the supernatural. There are things in this world that were beyond my understanding, and we must approach them with caution and respect. Although I was relieved that the wendigo had been defeated, I knew that I would never forget the terror I felt during that whole experience. The encounter with the wendigo and the shamanistic ritual permanently changed me in ways that my mortal mind cannot understand. It has made me more aware of the mysteries of our world and universe, and I now respect and fear the supernatural. I knew that I would never forget the experience and that it would always be a part of who I was. If you told me when I was a kid that I would have multiple paranormal experiences of my own, I would have been over the moon. But being on the other side, life was much simpler when I was just a blind believer. Back in my 20s, I worked as a tree planter up in Flathead County in Montana. It's the hardest job I've ever had. You have to hike over a lot of uneven ground carrying 30 to 40 pounds of trees hanging in bags off your hips. And you have to bend down to plant them, over and over. It's not that uncommon to have forest fires flare up when you're out planting. Some areas are so dry that anything can set them off. Even a spark from one of our shovels hitting a rock could be a concern. You just can't be too careful. One season it had been extremely hot and dry, and there had been a fire ban for weeks. I was out planting on my assigned patch of land when another tree planter rushed over to me waving his arms. I usually planted headphones on, which wasn't the smartest thing to do, I know, but it made the time go faster. I really should have been more alert and listened to the wildlife. My music was cranked up and I had been focused on my work, which means looking down a lot. My coworker had been sent to get my attention because I hadn't realized what was happening around me. There were 12 people on our crew. We were each assigned our own block of wilderness to work. I was just zoning out in my own area. A fire had sparked up and I hadn't even realized it. I had kind of noticed that it was hazy, but I had dismissed it as fog that hadn't burned off all the way yet. I remember I had also caught a glimpse of clouds I'd thought were rain clouds. But now I realized it was smoke. I realized that day that you don't always see smoke if you're not looking for it. My coworker told me we were getting surrounded by a fire that had sprung up suddenly. I should mention this was a helicopter job, which means that a helicopter picks up your crew in the morning. They fly you in and drop you in the middle of the area being reforested. You're just kind of in the middle of nowhere. You only have whatever you strap to your pack for the day. It turned out that other crews were on other blocks which were about to catch fire too. No one expected it. The fire just started and the wind was high. Me and the guy who found me met up with our foreman and raced off to find the rest of our crew. Your crew becomes your family, and we would get everyone out or die trying. Our foreman was trying to contact a chopper to get us out as soon as possible. There were only 3 choppers for the whole camp. There were probably about a dozen crews working out there, so almost 150 people evacuated. There were only about 6 seats available for people on each chopper. It was scary to contemplate. It meant that the project manager and foreman had to decide who got out and when. That meant a lot of trying to get accurate information from scared people in the field who know they may not get out if they aren't prioritized. We just focused on finding the rest of our crew. Like me, most hadn't figured out what was happening. Every planter we'd get, we would split off to find the next planter. It was a lot of ground to cover, and you had to keep your head on straight. It was important to work fast, but getting injured by being in a big hurry would put you and everyone else at a huge risk. We finally managed to get the whole crew grouped together with the foreman. Everyone was all right, except for the threat of the fire, obviously. We got the okay to go to the clearing where the helicopter would land. We were heading that way, and I was at the back of the line. That's when I heard the horrible yelping sound, like an animal in pain. I looked back and couldn't believe my eyes. My first thought was that it was a bear. There was a huge creature lumbering out of the forest, screaming. It sounded almost human. It was covered in reddish-brown hair and incredibly tall. It was way too tall to be a bear. If anything, it looked way more like an ape. I screamed and everybody else looked back. Then everybody was yelling, "Oh my God," and running like hell toward the helicopter. We all managed to climb into the copter while the creature kept running toward us and screaming at the top of its lungs. We lifted up just when it reached the clearing. I'll never forget looking down into that creature's face as we left the ground. It had these beady black eyes that I swear were looking right at me. I couldn't tell if it was scared or angry. I felt terrible leaving it there. What if it was asking for help? But what could we do, you know? It might have wanted to harm us. And there's no way we could have fitted on that copter. It was like 8 feet tall. It had these huge shoulders and chest. But still, I feel guilty to this day. I really hope that it didn't get caught in the fire. All the people on the mountain made it out okay. A few weeks later, we came back to finish planting the blocks that we'd abandoned because of the fire. Parts of the forest had gotten scorched, and parts were untouched. It felt strange to be back. I was definitely looking out for signs of that beast. I didn't see anything unusual. When our foreman had made the report, he'd made it sound like we saw something resembling a bear, but we had all seen it, and we knew better. I was riding along with my horses last week at about 8 in the evening. I noticed a bright flickering light that was unusual off in the distance. The horses kept getting spooked, so we walked closer to the area where we saw it to investigate. I realized it looked like a man carrying a lantern, walking slowly across the field towards some trees at an angle across from me, slightly in front of me. This thing or being or whatever it was looked very strange. I didn't quite understand what I was seeing. Then, out of the forest where this ghastly figure disappeared, was this strange canine-looking animal. It was very tall and appeared to have red amber-ish glowing eyes, pointed ears, long hair down to its back, midway along its tail, with what appeared to be a large mane just staring off in our direction. I was in such shock. I tried to get my horses to go forward, but they would not. They were rearing up on their hind legs, acting very afraid. I got off my horse and approached this creature with my weapon about to be drawn, but it quickly retracted itself back into the trees as if it was waiting for me. I ran into the woods after it. I could hear it running through the brush and climbing trees to get away from me. I followed it in further for about 15 minutes until I came upon a large open area with many trees. I knew this thing was hiding up in there just waiting to pounce. This thing was toying with me, and I knew it. I turned around and left the area the same way I came in. I could feel this thing following me like it wasn't done with me. It wanted to do things on its own terms. Even though I could feel its heavy presence lingering in the area, I left. I was afraid it was going to hurt my horses. Whatever this thing was, I was in the woods for a couple of days afterwards tracking this thing. I figured out that it kills its prey and drags them back into its den or burrow. There have been many dead game animals and possibly some missing persons. I'm sure of it. This has not been the first time this has happened either. One of the days while I was tracking this very strange animal, I found a large dugout in the earth that I believe was the den of this thing. It stunk like wet dog and rotting meat and urine very badly. I nearly vomited. At the edge there was a strange-looking severed hand and feet lying in a pile. I couldn't tell if it was human or not. It was pretty badly decayed. I know for sure that this thing is killing people around here. Who knows if they're hunting or hiking? It's bold enough to kill right out in the open, apparently. Among the pile of carcasses were also bones littered about in that god-awful stench. I have no way to prove this was actually the den of this animal, but I can only speculate. On the way back, I would hear strange noises, growling and rustling in the woods all around. The woods would get real quiet, and I'd get this strange sensation that was crawling up my spine, like something was about to happen. I knew I was being watched the entire time I'd be out walking around, just walking back to my house. Then, last night, I was out there tracking this creature again, and I heard something scream off in the distance, yelling several times. It seemed to be coming from the direction of my house, but it wasn't quite clear. I looked around but didn't see anything in the dark. No campfires or flashlights that could have possibly indicated somebody being out here. I mentioned this to some friends and family that lived nearby. They've heard similar things happening at night while being out here, whether they're hiking or walking their dogs. A lot more than once or twice over the years. There's something going on here that people are just not aware of. I almost wonder if this thing has been stalking the woods here for who knows how long. I could be talking about a legend, but I'm pretty sure this creature is true and real and has been around here for a very long time. Look, there's a lot more to this encounter than what I have told here. I would like to research this thing and maybe find out what it really is, if possible. My gut tells me there aren't mountain lions or coyotes that size roaming around, maybe not even wolves either. My speculation is this, that this creature, whatever it is something that is not from around here. I'm not exactly sure what it could have been. I just have a feeling that whatever this is, it is incredibly dangerous and should be avoided at all costs. We were living in this beautiful, peaceful little neighborhood in Idaho. It was a pretty quiet place. All the houses looked the same, the streets were clean and maintained, and we loved our neighbors. I'd been living there for a few years with my spouse. I'm a mechanic and I owned a shop in town that did pretty well. We really loved our house. The open layout was what originally attracted us to it, and even though it was a modern cookie-cutter house, it sort of had a vintage cabin vibe to it. It had a lot of character, and some of my favorite memories are from when we lived in that house. One evening, we were up late watching TV and chatting when our doorbell rang. It was very late and it kind of freaked me out a bit. I grabbed my gun just in case and went to the door. But when I checked, nobody was there. I got pissed off and thought it was some punk kids who were pulling some annoying prank. But then it happened again and again, always around the same time at night. One night I peeked from the window around the time the doorbell would normally ring, and I saw a young boy and girl standing on the porch. They were dressed in weird vintage-like old-time clothing and just staring at the door. I stood there for a while looking at them, waiting for them to ring the doorbell or do anything. But they just stood there, not moving at all. I opened the door and asked what they were doing, and they didn't say anything. They just kept standing there, staring straight ahead. It was really bizarre to say the least. At first, I thought what I saw was just an illusion because it was so dark outside, but I could swear the children's eyes were completely black, like there was no white at all, just black. It was super creepy. I was just about to command them to get the hell out of there when the girl asked if they could use our phone to call their mom. Her voice of monotonous, expressionless, and lifeless. It was hard to listen to. It really gave me the creeps, but they're children, so I figured I needed to help them out. I let them in, and as they walked into our house, their shoes barely made any sound at all. It was like they were trying not to make any sounds, but it was really creepy and you could cut the tension with a knife. My spouse was trying to be nice by trying to make small talk, but they were unresponsive and just wanted the phone. I handed the girl our home phone, and she looked at it like it was some relic from a bygone era. The boy remained silent, just staring into nothing. It was like they were in their own world, ignoring everything around them. The girl dialed a number on the phone, and as she talked, her voice remained flat, emotionless. I couldn't make out what she was saying. Her voice was barely a whisper. It took a few minutes, then she hung up, handed me the phone back, and with a curt, "Thank you," they both turned and left our house. Even after they'd gone, I couldn't shake off the eerie feeling. My spouse felt the same. We tried to laugh it off, saying how it was probably a prank, but deep down we were pretty shaken up. I double-checked all the locks that night, and for the first time in a long time, I kept my gun by the bedside. I was constantly on the lookout for those kids, but I never saw them again. Things were different after that. Everything was different. I'm convinced those kids cursed me and my family. My spouse and I, who used to get along really well, started having bitter fights. It wasn't just simple arguments or disagreements. It was full-blown screaming matches that lasted for hours, leading to sleepless nights and weary days. It was as if an unseen force had driven a wedge between us. Despite trying to talk things through, the fights only got worse until, eventually, we couldn't take it anymore and decided to part ways. The divorce left me in a state of turmoil, battling feelings of failure and isolation. I slipped into depression. It was a dark, bottomless pit that sucked away all the joy from my life. The mere act of getting out of bed in the morning felt like a huge task. I felt like I was drowning and no one could save me. I sought help, saw a psychiatrist who put me on a heavy dose of medication. The pills dulled the pain, made the world seem a little less bleak. But it was just a temporary fix. The sense of dread, of being cursed, never really left me. Meanwhile, things went south within my family, too. My brother got diagnosed with a rare condition, one the doctors said he had a 1 in a million chance of contracting. My mother, once the most energetic person I knew, was now constantly fatigued and unwell. It was as if our family was under some ominous shadow, afflicted by a string of bizarre health conditions. Everything that happened, everything that went wrong, it all started after those black-eyed children showed up at our door. It's hard to explain, but I could feel it deep in my bones that we had been cursed. I'm from Asbury Park, New Jersey, and I can tell you for a fact that the Jersey Devil has been out and about this past summer. There are a few reasons why I know it's been out. Basically, there have been signs of its presence, and I've actually spotted it in person myself. It's been well-known lore around here. I'm really worried, and I suspect that it's here to stay for a while. Maybe it was in hibernation or left for a while for whatever, but for the last 10 years I think it's not been around. When I was young, there were always rumors, and they came up with some precautions, like keeping the lid on the trash can and making sure the cats stay inside the house. Since it hadn't been spotted for a while, people started to get more relaxed. They let their dogs off leash in the woods and made compost piles in the backyard, and let their kids run around on the streets. The first sign of the return of the Jersey Devil was the trash cans. Right on Fairview Avenue in the middle of town, all of the trash cans had been dumped over and spilled onto the street. Now this was a Tuesday too, so it was pickup day, and the garbage man was completely irritated at the mess when he came by at about 5 a.m. We later learned that there was someone who had a house party, and he took his recyclables out on that street at around 3 in the morning with no issues. So the devil must have visited sometime between 3 and 5 in the morning. All right, so everyone maybe thought it just could have been the wind knocking over the bins, but I know it wasn't that because all the cans and bags of dog food and hamburger meat and sardines were completely clean. I mean, nothing left, like they had been licked. The next weird thing to happen was that I started noticing lots and lots of missing animal posters being put up. It seemed like every block had a new one. Some cat or dog that had been last seen in the backyard just up and vanished. You might have thought it was a coyote or a hawk or something, but there were big dogs going missing too. Like, how could a hawk pick up a Great Dane? It just couldn't. I started asking around if anyone thought it was the Jersey Devil, but nobody really wanted to think about that. I think sometimes people just get too worked up and scared to face reality. And the reality was that there was a creature among us. A neighbor of mine has been raising some chickens in her backyard ever since quarantine started. It wasn't long before I was woken up one morning to her screaming. The entire coop was a mess, with feathers scattered all over, and there were scratches at the door. It was like a terrible crime scene, and I knew who the culprit had to be. I decided to ask around and see if anyone could have had a Ring camera or something, thinking maybe they got a video of it, but no one in the area had one. So since nobody else seemed to be taking this seriously except for me, I decided I'd be the one to get a photo of this thing. I bought myself a trail cam at Bass Pro Shops. It seemed good enough, and it connects over wireless and Bluetooth so I can see it at all times. It takes a photo and a 15-second video anytime it gets triggered, as long as there is movement within the frame. I set it up right in my backyard on Fairview Avenue. The first few nights, I didn't see anything, only birds and squirrels running over to inspect the device. At some point, I realized I needed to set up some bait. The thought crossed my mind that live bait would have been the best, but I'm not cruel like that, so I just went down to the grocery store. I picked up a whole rotisserie chicken and put it out that night in front of the camera. When I went to check on it in the morning, the chicken was gone. I immediately pulled up the trail camera app and tried to see what kind of shot I got. There was nothing there except a 15-second clip at 4:06 a.m. when the chicken was visible, and then suddenly it was not. It was unbelievable. The chicken had vanished into thin air. I looked as closely as I could at the footage, but I couldn't make out anything but the hint of a shadow racing across the screen. Even when I played it back in super slow motion, I couldn't make anything out. I decided to set the trap again, but stay awake this time. Instead of just one chicken, I place a line of 6 in a row. A big meal for this fella. I had a few cups of coffee and just sat there by my window watching and waiting. It was a long night. Just as I was nodding off and my eyes were starting to droop, I saw the same shadowy figure race by. It stopped for a split second at each chicken before flying to the next. It had broad wings and a black body that galloped along. Just as quickly as it came, it was gone, flying up into the air and out of sight. The camera footage just doesn't do it justice, since it only captured the same grainy shadow swooping in and back and forth before I watched the chickens disappear. This is just a warning. I know the Jersey Devil is out here in Asbury Park, and residents need to be taking precautions. Keep your dogs and cats inside. Close the lids on your garbage, and please, if you can only do one thing, just stay inside at night.